Welcome back. In our last segment on the life of Prophet Muhammad, we ended off at a pivotal point, his migration to Medina. But what was life like in Medina? What major events occurred during this period in the Prophet's life and that of Muslims? Let's sit down with Dr. Shabir Ali to learn more. Welcome to the show, Dr. Shabir.
Pleasure to be on.
So, what did the Prophet do when he got to Medina?
Well, one of the first things he did was to establish a masjid. This is known as Masjid Quba, named after the place where he first arrived at Medina. And that, of course, shows the pivotal nature of the mosque in a Muslim society. It becomes like a community center, a meeting hall to deal with community affairs, and so on. So Bilal, one of the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, began to call the adhan, which is an announcement that the prayer is about to begin, so that the community knows to rally to the masjid.
The Qibla also changed, so the direction in which the Muslims used to pray. Can you give us a little bit of information on that?
Yes. The Prophet, peace be upon him, was born in Mecca, as we already described, and there in Mecca was the Kaaba, and it still remains. It is a cubical structure, a house of worship, a mosque. And in those days, of course, Muslims and non-Muslims all together worshipped at the same place, but the non-Muslims had their idols in those days housed in the Kaaba as well, the objects of their worship, whereas Muslims worship the unseen creator of the heavens and the earth. But they refer to God, the unseen God, as the Lord of this house, the one who really owns this place. So Muslims would have had no difficulty worshipping at that center. But when they moved to Medina, now what should they have considered now the center of their worship? They noticed that there were Jews in the environment, and Jews were respected by Muslims because they were recipients of a divine revelation, the Torah. And as much as Jews were doing religious things, Muslims looked at them and said, okay, well, those must somehow come from Moses and instructions from God through the Prophet Moses, so we should follow that as well. So the Muslims then began to perform their prayers in the same direction as the Jews did, which was towards Jerusalem. But then, in the second year of the Hijrah, by this time, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, himself may have started to feel that the Muslims needed a distinctive sort of direction of prayer that would not simply align the Muslims as though they were like part of a sect of Judaism or something like this. So the Quran describes the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as turning towards the heavens in his vision, almost as if he's waiting for a divine revelation to come down from God to tell him what to do. And then the revelation comes to him to say, well, from wherever you are, turn your faces towards what is referred to as Masjid al-Haram, which I referred to previously as the Kaaba, the sacred mosque, or the Kaaba. And then the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, began with his followers to direct their prayers towards that sacred place of worship.
And to this day, every single Muslim all around the world prays in that direction.
Yes, and what this does is that it creates a kind of unifying sense among all Muslims worldwide. It means that no matter where you are, you have a single orientation. This is the center of our worship. It's not that God dwells there, whereas in Jewish thinking there was the idea that God dwelt or Shekinah at least, dwelt in the Holy of Holies, which is in the innermost part of the temple. But in the case of Muslim thinking, the Kaaba is owned by God, and it is a symbol of the worship of the one God. But God is the unseen creator of the heavens and the earth. He's bigger and greater than we can imagine.
So then there were some other significant events that also happened during this time, some battles. So can you tell us a little bit about, I guess, some of the important key battles that occurred during this time as well?
Yes. Now, it so happens that when the historians first set out to deal with the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the battles ranked prominently in their minds. Well, of course, battles are important and they're significant, and this is what gets written about in the first historical effort to chronicle the events in the life of a community. And so this is what has happened with the Muslim community as well. But we should not get the impression that it was all about battles, because a battle may occur one year, and then 2 years may pass and another battle may occur. So what happened with the 365 days in a year, 2 years times that. Before the next battle. We need to know all of that information. But nevertheless, as you have asked, so here are the major battles. First, the Battle of Badr in the second year of after the Prophet, peace be upon him, had migrated. In the following year, the Battle of Uhud, and then 2 years later, the Battle of the Trench. And then eventually a peace treaty that was signed at a place called Hudaybiyah in the 6th year after the Prophet, peace be upon him, had migrated. So depending on how much time we have, we can elaborate on the circumstances behind each one of these battles and draw out some significance and lessons for Muslims today.
Perhaps, I guess maybe focusing on the Battle of Badr, perhaps what are some lessons that we can learn from that specific battle?
One of the important things we need to be clear about regarding the Battle of Badr is that some of the historians, Muslims to begin with, have depicted this as something that was instigated by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, himself. Whereas Allama Shibli Nomani, in his book, Allama Shibli Nomani is an Indian scholar from a couple of generations back. His book was written in Urdu, and now parts of it have been translated into English. He has shown decisively, based on the Quranic evidence, which is prime evidence when we think about the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that the Prophet, when he set out, he didn't actually set out to instigate a battle. He was actually setting out in response to a battle that was being thrust upon him. The intelligence had already reached the Prophet, peace be upon him, that the Meccan army had been marching against his city, and it was necessary therefore for him to go out and meet the Meccan army. When he went and met them at a place called Badr, named after the wells that are there, which would have been a strategic point for him to meet an advancing army of that large size.
So could we say that with all of the battles then, it wasn't that the Prophet was seeking war with the enemy? Because one could argue that.
No, in fact, he wasn't seeking war with the enemy. He was mainly defending his city. As I've just shown in the case of the Battle of Badr, we can see that also in the case of the Battle of Uhud. The Battle of Uhud, the place where this is fought, is just on the outskirts of the city of Medina. And the Battle of the Trench illustrates this more clearly, because the Prophet, peace be upon him, was in his city, and he practiced the defensive measure of digging a trench by the northern pass of the city, where the enemy is going to have, that would be their entry point if they wanted to enter the city. Now, we can see more clearly who is the aggressor and who is practice a defensive measure, particularly in the case of this battle. Let's survey the whole situation. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was born in Mecca, and he migrated away from Mecca to Medina. Mecca is where the Muslims are being persecuted. The Prophet, peace be upon him, left that scene of violence and moved to another town some 400 kilometers to the north, 250 miles approximately. That's the city of Medina, where the Prophet lived the remaining days of his life, the last 10 years. It is here that these battles are occurring. That means that the Meccan army has marched some 400 kilometers to go and attack the Prophet's city, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, is there defending his city, especially in the Battle of the Trench, by digging a trench to stave off the advancing army from entering the city, knowing that if those armies were to enter the city, they would pillage and plunder and rape and burn. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, obviously then was practicing defensive strategies in battle.
That's all the time we have, but we'll definitely continue this on in our series. So thank you, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.